This is Jim Cantelon Today. I'm Jim Cantelon. Welcome to the show, friends. Yesterday, I interviewed the former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the Honourable David Onley. Today, I'm interviewing his wife, Ruth Ann. And we'll talk a little bit about life at Queen's Park with her as well. But we're going to get very personal in terms of a tragedy and a celebration that the Onleys experienced just in the past few months. The celebration referred to the birth of little baby Isabel last August, gorgeous little baby girl, their first grandchild. The tragedy refers to the month following, when another little baby girl was born to another of their sons. And this little girl's name was Sarah. And after a week, she died. Not just the juxtaposition, but the great polarities of celebration of new life and the mourning of new life past is almost more than one can bear. And I know that the Onleys to this point are still torn between the two polarities. And a lot of you have had experience with life and death. Some of you have experienced bereavement just in the past week, maybe the past month. Some of you are dealing with the consequences, the outflowing of that grief to this point, even as you're watching this show. I hope that the interview with Ruth Ann Onley will be an encouragement to you. And we'll get to her right after this.
This is a Voice of the Martyrs Canada news update, a special report.
What began with anti-government protests escalated into a full-scale civil war involving the brutal tactics of Islamic State jihadist militants. More than 200,000 Syrians have lost their lives in 4+ years of armed conflict. About a quarter of them were Christians. In spite of all they've had to go through, Karima says their faith in Jesus hasn't wavered.
God is with us wherever we go.
Tens of thousands of Christians have died in the war since 2011. Despite the dangers, the Voice of the Martyrs Canada has been able to help persecuted Christians in Syria, providing food, supplies, Bibles, and prayer.
For more information, visit www.vomcanada.com.
Ruth Ann Onley is very well known to at least Ontario residents as her honor. She and her husband David Onley had a very significant role to play in Canada for 7 years. David was the Lieutenant Governor. And I'm not sure, Ruth Ann, when you were asked by him whether or not you'd be open to this whole idea from the beginning, you realized what it's going to mean for you.
No, I didn't have really any idea for myself.
I mean, in a sense, you became like the first lady of the province. You had a very public profile. You were involved in all kinds of fundraising efforts. You went all over the province, up to the north, south, east, west. You went to see the Queen. Was it difficult suddenly becoming the wife of the Lieutenant Governor?
It was a role. When I went in, I said, "What's my role?" And they said, "You can do anything you want," which is kind of a very open statement. Yeah. I think to a point, we didn't have the staff. I would not have the ability to have the amount of staff that a Governor General's wife has. There wasn't. No. I decided very early I would support. My role would be to support. The only reason, truly, that I was able to go up to visit the far north is because David could not. And so they said, "Will you go?" And I decided, yes, I would.
So you went as his representative?
I went up, and I wouldn't give a speech in the name of the Queen.
Right.
That's not my role. But I would say that, you know, I'm here because His Honor can't be here, and that we have our eye on you. My role up north was to let people know they were not forgotten, as we know from...
Yeah, well, Attawapiskat, for instance, as we're talking, still is very much in the news. Did you ever go there?
I think I did. I was trying to remember if I had or not. I went 22 visits. There were 22 different areas that I would go up, but James Bay was part of it. What was
your sense when you were visiting these James Bay communities, many of whom you have to fly into? There's no roads accessing them. Were you shocked at what you saw?
It was an eye-opener. It opened my eyes to just the isolation they had ice roads in the winter. I took one once. It was like being on chocolate milk. It was March, and I thought, I don't want to be here because it was very slushy, and I thought, we're going to go through. Yeah. That was the only experience I had on ice road, but they're all isolated, all water around when you'd fly in, you could just look down and see the green, and then all ponds of water around. The development is what it is. Some of it's very, very in need of more better housing. The roads, it's a different world up there.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's the same province. And Kathy and I have done a little bit of work in Nunavut, which is even further north, up on Baffin Island. And you get the sense when you're there that you really have maybe landed on another planet.
You do. It
doesn't feel the same at all.
We did, the reason I was there was because the Office of Lieutenant Governor, because of James Bartleman, the former Lieutenant Governor, and his reading camps and literacy, his initiatives for literacy, which when a child has literacy, they have hope at least for an education, or at least a base. So we continued that. We had the funds continue on. David continued 7 years more of these literacy camps every summer, and so I would make sure that I was up there for one visit at least during the summer. We would see the young people that were sent up, and then we'd see to run the camps all through the summer from the various colleges, and so it was an eye-opener. But it gave them hope, because the parents wrote back, and feedback was that this gives our children somewhere to go during the summer, and they're not down by the water,
What was your first impression when you met Her Majesty the Queen?
Very petite, very short, very short. Very radiant. I know you asked David what, the one person definitely was the Queen. I think because she's iconic, but very radiant, and she does her homework. She knows the people she's talking to. She knows your background, and so does her family. When Prince Charles when I first met him in 2009, he met David, and then he turned to me and he said, "So, you're the gospel singer." The man either had, and I know what they have a very small little booklet in their pockets. Prince Edward had one, Sophie, Her Royal Highness Sophie had one, and so did Charles. It's a small itinerary, and it's their whole year, I believe, or their whole trip, but it's very tiny. And I mean, if the note wasn't in there, I don't know how do you remember me?
When Prince Charles mentioned, "Oh, so you're the gospel singer," did he ask you to sing for him?
I don't know whether he asked me or not, but I actually ended up singing for them.
You did?
In our music room, which is the awards room at Queen's Park, I sang "God Save the Queen," and they were right behind me.
Did you accompany yourself on the piano, or
no?
You sang it a cappella?
I think it was a cappella, and it was a bit of a pinch me, because I was looking right at the fireplace, and over the fireplace was the picture of Her Majesty.
I mean, how many people have ever done that?
It was neat.
That's totally cool.
Very cool. It was.
Very cool indeed. Were you nervous?
I was a little bit, but I've sung it several times down there.
Yeah.
Many times, actually.
But not with the Queen's.
No, not with the Queen's son, future king.
Well,
it was
there you
very
go.
exciting.
Okay, let's switch gears. Ruth Ann Onley, the mom and grandma. Last fall, was it last fall?
Yes. Yeah.
You had the joy of your very first little granddaughter born, Isabel?
Isabel was born August 20th. Yes.
August 20th. September, baby Sarah was born.
Yes, September 2nd.
And she died.
Then our second granddaughter, Sarah, was born September 2nd, and we knew Sarah would not survive. We knew because there had been major extensive testing done in the womb, and we called her Teddy. That was her name before she was born, little Teddy, that Teddy would have major heart problems and brain. And that Mummy was given the option, my daughter-in-law Andrea, with all the visits, to terminate, that she was not going to live, inoperable if she did live. She also had the great odds of not even surviving to be born, that she would miscarry, but Andrea said, "No termination, and I will carry, and we'll see what the Lord does."
Fully prepared for the eventuality that she might die.
She was definitely. They didn't put a nursery together, but I know this has happened with many. I've read since this about so many moms that that carry babies that don't live.
9 months of expectation, knowing that you're going to have at best just a few hours. Now, as it turned out, it was a week, right?
They had 6 days with Sarah. They had her all on tubes. She was very tubed up, and we were able to see her several times going down to visit. But they spent most of the time, it was mom and dad were obviously with her 24/7. And then on the final day, the doctor said we can't keep her on these medications any longer. And so they took the tubes out, and they had 8 hours to be with Sarah, untethered. They walked around with her in their arms as general, parents. Sick kids went outside. It was sunny and nice outside. We have pictures.
But it is to weep. I mean, this is like a tragic movie.
It's a very sad story, and it's one that I'm learning and reading about more women who have lost children that way.
Now, what is it? I mean, you're still dealing with this, but what is it like to you're celebrating this new life, little Isabel on the one hand, and little Sarah is gone on the other within a month's time? I mean, that's got to tear you apart.
It's a difficult balance in some ways with our family. We have Isabel. Isabel lives in Ottawa, and so we don't even see her, But it's very tender. It's a very tender time. It is what it is, and our children don't see each other frequently at all. But I still believe there's. We're just hoping for some results that are on test for Andrea and Jonathan, our son and daughter-in-law, for future children, and we'll see what the Lord
Did this
does.
precipitate for any of you a crisis of faith?
No, it didn't. And I said to somebody about, in my life, with David and with polio, and in our family life affected by polio, surely the Lord will never do anything, will never allow anything greater to come in, to be a trial in life. And that's not true. And the other thing is, I don't think it's not the Lord allowing, it's life. Yeah. And there are things in life you'll never understand, and there are mysteries in life you'll never understand, and I'm okay with that. Yeah. We don't have to know everything. Our world wants to know everything, and demands it. Our internet and information world that we live in.
What did Paul say? I know whom I have believed, and I'm persuaded that he's able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. He allowed for mystery, for unanswered questions.
Yeah, mystery.
But my heart goes out to you. I know what it's like to lose someone.
Yes, your family, for sure.
Thanks so much, Ruth Ann.
You're very welcome. Good to be here.
I'll be back with more after this, friends. We are now into John 14, and we're going to discover in this chapter, 15, 16, and 17, some of the most powerful interaction, well, I think the most powerful interaction that Jesus ever had with his disciples. It's absolutely profound, inspiring, instructive, and I am loving the fact that we can take as much time with it as we want to take. So, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. I mean, how those words just kind of resonate throughout the centuries. Before getting into this dissertation, however, let me just describe the upper room to you. Now, first of all, when you're in Israel and Jerusalem specifically, you see a lot there that goes right back to the time of Jesus. For instance, in Jerusalem, I can take you to pavements in the Old City, for instance, that are literally the very same pavements that Jesus walked on. Laid there in the roadways by the Romans, and boy, they weren't messing around when it came to pavements. They would put these massive stones in, sometimes, a meter plus in length, a meter plus in width, and maybe half a meter in thickness. And when they laid those things down, nobody's going to move them. They put them down like brickwork, and it's little wonder that people have been able to walk on them, horses pulling carts on them, millions of steps over the centuries without any show really of wear or tear. Smoothed off a bit, but just as vital and as strong as they were in the time of Jesus. Then there's other parts of Jerusalem that have been put in because of the razing of the city by various armies over the centuries. And even in terms of the walls of the city, you'll have some original stones way down at the base, but then you'll have stones that were laid there centuries later by other kings after they were trying to rebuild the city of Jerusalem after a great defeat by some army. So you have the old and the new, but even the new is old. The main walls of the old city of Jerusalem were put there in place by the workforce of Suleiman the Magnificent. That goes back about 600 years or so. And so something at 600 years old is pretty old, and yet in comparison to some of the other stonework in Jerusalem, it's relatively recent. Having said that, when we talk about the upper room, and there is an upper room, surely it's not the original, although it may be built essentially on the site of the house that originally housed the upper room. What we do know is that it was probably the upper story of a house owned by John Mark's parents. Yes, the same Mark who wrote the Gospel of Mark. And most Bible scholars believe that the Gospel of Mark was the first of the Gospels written. It was an upper room, an upper story. We don't know, for what it was used, probably for guests, maybe for dining. It wasn't uncommon, and even to this day it's not uncommon in that part of the world, especially in the heat of summer, to go up onto the roof of the buildings. They're all flat roofed, in the cool of the evening to have your evening meal, just because it's like a natural air conditioner. The wind blows in from the desert at about 5 o'clock every night. You can almost set your clock by it. You see the trees start to sway, and this cool air comes in. It's a glorious moment. I lived there for 7 years, and I loved every evening at 5 when that beautiful desert wind would blow into the city. But often people would eat up there, and sometimes they'd sleep up there just because it was so nice and cool. So the upper room would be there. It'd be adjacent to the rooftop, probably access to the rooftop, and very commonly used. And maybe in the wintertime, or if there should be some freak rainstorm in the summertime, they would come from the rooftop into the upper room. We can only speculate as to how it was used. However, the upper room as it exists today is the upper room of a two-story building. And at one time, it was a mosque. And even now, when you go in there, you see the vestiges of the Islamic worship and some of the symbols of worship that have not been touched. They're still there, very much in evidence. But hundreds of thousands of Christian pilgrims come through there every year, and often have a wonderful celebration remembering the day of Pentecost, where the upper room played a prominent role. This would be where this Last Supper was taken by Jesus and his disciples. So, they've just gone through some very strange events. To say nothing of Jesus washing their feet, which totally threw them, and then to Jesus predicting that he's going to be betrayed, and then this strange kind of interaction between Jesus and Judas, and then Peter's bold statement that he would never, ever fail the Lord, and Jesus said, oh, hang on, before the cock crows, that means before tomorrow morning, you're going to deny me 3 times. Well, this all on top of this talk that had been building and building and building from Jesus, that his time was short, his hour had come, destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll build it back again. They didn't know what to make of this. They were getting increasingly fearful that they had blown it in terms of expecting Jesus to be the Messiah, but also they'd grown to love Jesus over these 3 years. They didn't want to see him go. They didn't want everything to kind of come crashing down on them. They didn't want him to be just another one of the zealots, who had promised the moon but couldn't deliver. And so they were conflicted. They were torn between opinions. And now, there was this specter of someone betraying Jesus. And, The night has come. It's just a very tough time. And their hearts are troubled. And who can blame them? So Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God? Terrific. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, what I've told you, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. Now, I don't know if Jesus is literally describing what awaits us, some kind of condominium development, or five-star hotel, with the many rooms. I think what he's referring to is the fact, as he says, I go to prepare a place for you. Now, I can't stress this enough. I often have referenced these words when I have been speaking at someone's funeral. Here's what we know from the scriptures. God created us. He knew us before we were formed in our mother's womb. He knows our name. He knows our life circumstances. He knows that we are His. He has called us at one point in our lives to Himself. The scripture says nobody comes unless the Father draw him. He's drawn us to Himself, and we are His. We also know that He has committed Himself to us, never to leave us nor forsake us. We may find ourselves strong and then weak, undulating up and down in our faith over the course of our lives. He never undulates. He is always faithful. He never falters. We spend a lot of time talking about our commitment to Him, which is a good topic of conversation, but what we need to be talking about is His commitment to us. He has made a profound commitment to us out of the eternities, out of His omniscience. And this is something that should make you feel very secure, all right? He knows your name. He knows where you come from. He knows where you're going. He also knows that this seed of faith that He has placed in your heart is going to burst forth one day into His presence, where you will be transformed into the planting of the Lord, as the scripture puts it so beautifully, where you will be a new creation. You'll be of a new order. And that new order will so eclipse what you have been, you may even forget what you have been, but the point is, it has its roots in the very decisions you make right now in space and time. So He's going to prepare a place for us. Not only does He know us here, but He will know us there. And in all of this space, if you will, if you can use that word where, the words space and time don't really apply, but we're limited because of human language, so we'll have to use the word even though it doesn't really apply. But there is a place for us, a place that is uniquely ours in the everlasting kingdom. A place that's identified with you by name. And I suspect that, on the other side one day, we certainly will be social creatures like we are here. And we will have access to one another, and we will be able to visit one another's place. Why not? In the King James Version, it talks about mansions. I go to prepare a mansion, a place for you. Whether it's a house or some kind of marvelous dwelling, or whether it's a room of some description, whatever it is, you can be sure it will be glorious. And it will never fade. It will never deteriorate. There will be no need for renovation in the kingdom of heaven. It will always be up to date. Very easy to be up to date when there's no such thing as a date in the everlasting kingdom. It will be current totally now, because in the eternal realm, everything is now. There's so much here that's loaded into this promise of Jesus to the disciples. Don't be troubled. Don't look at this thing as a snapshot. Look at it as a movie. Understand it's a work in progress, and you haven't seen the end of the story. Because the end of the story will be the glorious beginning of a story that will never end. And if there's anything that should comfort the troubled heart, it is these words. And if your heart is troubled right now, I want you to be encouraged with these words. Because Jesus speaks to us as much as He speaks to His disciples. I go to prepare a place for you. I am providing for you here in space and time, and I'll provide for you in the eternal dimension. You will always be cared for, and you'll be under my wings, to use that beautiful analogy. Under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be our shield and buckler.
This is a Voice of the Martyrs Canada news update, a special report.
More than 200,000 Syrians have lost their lives in 4+ years of armed conflict. About a quarter of them were Christians. Prior to the uprising and then the war, there were about 3 million Christians in the country. About half of them have left, and most of the rest want to leave as well.
It breaks my heart to see what is happening to my nation with all the terrorism and the violence among the people.
If you would have come to Syria before, you would have seen how it was full of churches and beautiful Christian places, and now it's all gone. It's all destroyed.
Amani was encouraged by the concern and support of the Voice of the Martyrs Canada, but is pleading with Christians everywhere to continue to pray.
For more information, visit www.vomcanada.com.
If you're like me, friends, you felt Ruth Onley's pain as she talked about having lived her whole marriage, with David Onley, her husband, with the realities of polio and the impact that that had on every aspect of their life to this day. And then this added stress and suffering that came from little baby Sarah's death. And I'm sure a lot of you resonated with that, because it seems that for some of us, tragedy upon tragedy, sorrow upon sorrow, stress upon stress, and we wonder, how much can the human heart take? Ruth Ann says there's mystery here. Boy, how profound that is. We tend, when something bad happens, to either blame God or blame ourselves or blame both. We figure that there's got to be some kind of cause and effect that produced this tragedy. The fact is, as Jesus himself points out in the Gospels, that it's not the case of having earned tragedy. It's a case sometimes of just simply God utilizing the tragedy, utilizing the suffering to manifest his glory and his comfort and his presence in the lives of not only those affected, but those who are close to those who are affected, so that ultimately the Lord is glorified. I don't understand this. That's why it's called a mystery. You don't understand it. That's why it's called a mystery. But the point is, there's a lot of mystery to faith. There's a lot that we don't yet know, we don't yet see. I'm Jim Cantelon. Thanks for watching JCT. Back again next time.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click support.